There have been a lot of rumours and plenty of speculation recently about what's going to happen to the Halo franchise and Halo Infinite moving forward. Will a new team at developer 343 Industries be in charge of the series' direction? Will the Slipspace engine still be used, or will Unreal Engine be the #1 choice from here on out? And is it possible that the Infinite concept could be ditched altogether, despite 343 stating that it was meant to be the foundation upon which a 10-year plan was built? I don't comment on this sort of thing, and I ain't gonna start now, but all this chitter chatter did get me thinking about Halo Infinite and what I'd like to see from a sequel. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about 5 things I'd love to see carried over from that game, 5 things I wasn't such a fan of, and 5 things I think need to be changed. And now, let's begin with the good stuff. It might sound like I'm going a bit overboard here, but I think the best thing 343 has introduced to the Halo series since they took over is the Grapple Shot. Mobility for me is one of the most important parts of any shooter, especially one with a multiplayer offering, and 343 got things spot on in this regard. From a design perspective, the Grapple Shot makes a lot of sense, as it allows you to travel across the massive open world of Zeta Halo far quicker than on foot when there are no vehicles to hand. But what elevates it beyond the status of gimmick is the extra utility it offers in addition to it letting you channel your inner Peter Parker. You can use it to grab weapons, for example, or close the distance between yourself and enemies, and however you end up using it, it always feels intuitive. If the next Halo ends up being a more linear affair, I'd probably have it be something available only during certain sections or missions, like the jetpack or sprint previously, but if it once again features an open world, the Grapple Shot is an absolute must-have. I'm not particularly proud of this fact, but I have played more than 2,000 games of Halo Infinite's multiplayer. Why? Well, possibly because I'm a sad man, but also because I love Halo and Infinite's gameplay is buttery smooth. Halo's combat has always been built around the golden triangle of guns, melee and grenades, and that's definitely still the case in Infinite, but it's the way everything has been tuned around the trio that really makes its gameplay sing. There's an excellent selection of weapons, each of which offers different utility, movement always feels responsive and has a great learning curve to it, and in general, for the first time in a long time, it feels like a genuine improvement over older titles, even those developed by Bungie. I was somewhat disappointed with what was built around this excellent core experience, and we'll get to that shortly, but I genuinely believe that at this stage only minimal refinements need to be made to Halo's gameplay ahead of the next game in the series being released. Halo Infinite's soundtrack is also really good. Being brutally honest, I thought 4's was the most forgettable in the entire series, and 5's was decent but not one I often revisit, whereas Infinite's is one I've regularly dipped in and out of since release. I must add a disclaimer here though, it is not as good as the soundtracks in any of the Bungie developed titles. That being said, it does utilise multiple motifs from previous tracks in the series. There's plenty of percussion, a staple of the franchise's music, and a load of drums to boot, again like in older titles. It's a great effort which fits really well with the tone and aesthetic of the game as a whole, and I would love to see it expanded upon in future titles. While it may not be the most cutting-edge game out there graphically, I think Halo Infinite still looks the business. It's important when looking at any game that you are able to separate artistic direction and graphical fidelity. If we were to judge the game purely in terms of graphical fidelity, it wouldn't be one of the best looking games ever made for sure, but it's definitely not one of the worst either. It runs very smoothly and looks lovely and sharp on my Series X, and I've no complaints whatsoever. With regards to artistic direction, it's the best Halo has looked in a good while. There was a lot of talk prior to Infinite's release of 343 channeling the spirit of Combat Evolved's second mission Halo, and that's plain for all to see. Aesthetically, it looks exactly how I'd have imagined Halo to look 20 years after the series burst onto the scene. It's consistent, it takes what Bungie started and builds on it, and I really did feel a sense of wonder stepping out into the expansive world of Zeta Halo for the very first time. Special mention must also go to the Forerunner structures in particular. They were hands down the biggest surprise for me. I was not at all a fan of them in 4 or 5, but they look superb in Infinite. They're technological and complex without being over-designed, and I cannot overstate just how good a job 343 did with them. All I can say is, bravo. I've no idea what the general consensus is among the community when it comes to this one, so I'm not sure if this is a controversial opinion or not, but I really like the weapon. It cannot be denied that it's janky storytelling in a way. 343 was clearly concerned about getting rid of Cortana, and so introducing a new character that sort of looks like her and definitely sounds like her, I'd imagine was their way of attempting to take the sting off things, and it worked. Granted, she is very quippy, and towards the start of Infinite she might be a bit much, but the further the campaign progressed, the more she grew on me, to the point where I'm looking forward to seeing how her character continues to develop. Also, I guarantee beyond a shadow of a doubt that 343 want to call her Cortana but left it ambiguous to gauge people's reactions. If there was a lot of positive buzz about the idea of her being named Cortana, they would have probably gone with it, but I hope for the love of all that is good in the world that they came up with something else. Anything would be better than that. Big Terry, Agatha, Stradivarius Winterbottom, literally anything else would be preferable. Okay, so that's the good parts out of the way. Next, let's talk about some of the dodgier stuff featured in Halo Infinite. The aspect of Halo Infinite I was most disappointed by is how static Zeta Halo feels much of the time. I wasn't expecting the open world to react to your actions on the level of games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or The Witcher 3, where the choices you make often have real and lasting consequences within the world, but I did hope for at least some dynamism. As it stands, everything is rather static. Yes, you do occasionally get dropships appearing or enemy reinforcements ferried in, but that's about it. There was so much potential to do something great here. Imagine rounding a corner or climbing up to a new area only to be met by a scarab, or travelling into a new environment to be met by Marines and Banished duking it out across a huge vehicular battle. It would have been amazing. Instead, what you get is very small skirmishes and Marines who don't really do a whole lot apart from when you're driving them around, and generally it just lacks the spectacle that makes other Halo games so special. The Marines especially really need an upgrade going into the next title in the series, as they're key to making battles what they are in other games. Decking them out with loads of strong weapons and travelling around in a Razorback with them is cool to start off with, but there's just not enough beyond that, which is a great shame. For me at least, the vehicles in Infinite were a bit of a letdown. They feel like they're made out of bits of especially thin paper, like they could fall apart when hit with the slightest gust of wind, and they have no weight at all. I like a bit of oomph to my vehicular combat, like the Bungie games of old, and I don't think 343 managed to deliver on that. They're floaty and light, and they don't feel as fun to use as they did previously. Plus, with shock damage now causing a major issue, they have another weakness to contend with, which means Infinite's vehicles don't make for a very compelling experience. There is nothing in the world more annoying than being constantly stun-locked by shock weapons when you're just trying to have a bit of fun. In Halo Infinite, there are way too many occasions during which 343 reverts to the tried and tested go to this place and do this thing 3 or 4 times mission design. Batteries aren't necessarily a bad idea if you use them once or twice, and I don't mind travelling to a load of different spires that all look the same if their interiors were all different. However, there's way too much of it in the game. This is probably due to it having to be put together in record time despite 6 years passing since the release of Halo 5, but that doesn't make it any more enjoyable. I can count on one hand the number of times you had to do similar in other Halo titles, and it's frankly pretty painful. Here's hoping whatever game we end up getting next, a lot more care is put into thinking about what makes for a compelling experience, rather than simply making you do things on repeat over and over again. So many people who played Infinite prior to release said that the side content wasn't like Far Cry or similar games, and that it had a whole lot more to offer. That's not the case, it's as generic as they come. Some of you might enjoy that stuff, and more power to you if so, but I personally don't see the point in it. If the areas were designed in interesting ways or had more unique challenges attached to them, they might work, but they usually don't. I was all for having a robust menu of side content outside the game's campaign, however, only on the contingency that it was half decent. A series like Halo should be setting trends, not following them, and what we received in Halo Infinite felt like little more than an ode to other open worlds that had come before. Finally, I didn't love Halo Infinite's cutscenes, especially during the second half of the game. There are some big issues with its level design, especially when you reach the campaign's later stages, with missions taking place mostly in Forerunner structures, which did dictate what could be shown in cinematics to a certain degree, but that doesn't excuse the fact that they're not very varied. If you enjoy watching characters talk while standing next to a terminal, you likely had a whale of a time. Otherwise, I can't imagine you did. There is a lot more focus placed on emotional moments between characters, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the military action element was definitely missing quite a lot of the time. There is the occasional highlight, like Chief flying through the air or chasing the Harbinger, but there could have been a lot more, and in general, I found Infinite to lack the cinematic qualities older titles had in abundance. Last but not least, we come to the things I think it's vital 343 Industries take another look at. Number 1 on my list for this section is extraordinarily important. No matter what other features are planned for the next Halo, online and split-screen co-op as well as a level select function must be key considerations from development's outset. Infinite has had no co-op whatsoever since its release nearly a year ago, and 5 featured no split-screen option either. My fondest Halo memories are those from time spent sitting on a sofa playing the various campaigns with my mates, and for that to not even be possible anymore is a crying shame. Being able to choose which level you jump into is also a no-brainer as well. Some might argue that an open world makes it more difficult to include, but I don't really see why. Simply stick me at the nearest fob or similar at the exact point in the story, perhaps with all the side content turned off temporarily to avoid any issues, and Bob's your uncle. Also, it would make my life creating videos about Infinite's campaigns so much easier, so pretty please with sprinkles on top 343, make sure it's not left out next time. This next change is one I'm sort of expecting to happen anyway, but regardless I think it deserves to be included. After Halo 4 introduced a Didact who was then killed off outside the games never to be seen again, and 5 set up the whole evil Cortana and the Guardians plotline which then pretty much concluded prior to the events of Infinite, can we next time just have the story continue in a more sequential, logical manner? Whether I like the story beats 343 landed on for Infinite or not is another thing entirely, but whether I do or don't, I want to see what happens next in the next game. I don't want the Endless to have been thwarted off screen prior to Halo Infinite 2 or Halo Infinitia or whatever it ends up being called, nor do I want there to be a massive time jump during which a load of key events happen that we don't get to see. 343, imagine everyone who played Infinite has consumed no other Halo media between it and the sequel, and craft your story accordingly. That leads me nicely into my next point, which is that I don't want to be made aware of loads of cool events that occurred that I didn't get to see or be a part of. In fact, scrap the getting to see part. We get to see the attack on the UNSC Infinity, and that didn't make me feel any better. That could have been one of the best openings in the series if you were able to actually play it. A daring concept for a video game, I know, but for some reason one of Infinite's most exciting moments was relegated to a mere cutscene. And then there's those events it would be harder to make you a part of, but still needed quite a bit more gravitas attached to them. Cortana's downfall, the destruction of the Brute's homeworld. Why couldn't these have been treated with a bit more reverence? They're massive events in story terms. In fact, we're told about more interesting things that happened off-screen than actually happened on-screen during Infinite, and that is not a great combination. Hopefully, this problem is one that can be fixed fairly easily. I love the different grenades and equipment included in Infinite, and as stated previously, using them feels great, but I'd love it to be easier to switch between them. Maybe it's just me, although hopefully not, but choosing a specific grenade or piece of equipment is cumbersome at best and downright irritating at worst. Their current setup on the D-pad doesn't really work for me, and I'd love to see a weapon wheel of sorts incorporated for both, so that there's a clear visual indicator of what you're choosing rather than just some tiny icons in the corner of the screen. I usually just end up leaving the Grapple Shot equipped 99% of the time and just spam nades until I don't have any more, and I'd love to see 343 tweak things to account for my absurd lack of dexterity. Now this next one is pretty much entirely dependent on whether the next Halo is set in an open world or not. As soon as Infinite was announced as being open world, my mind began racing as I thought of all the opportunities on offer. The one I fixated on most was the idea of 343 using the open world as a tool for telling smaller stories within the Halo universe. Well, that and the idea of a dynamic flood infestation which took over more or less of the map depending on how much action you took against them, but that one seems especially unrealistic these days. There are a ton of intriguing tidbits you can find regarding characters who don't appear in Infinite itself through audio logs, enemy bios or similar in Infinite, such as Lasky or Locke. Zeta Halo is ripe for telling those stories. Rather than including fairly generic base clearing or assassination missions, why not incorporate other characters into smaller plotlines as part of them to give them more narrative weight, almost like ODST's smaller missions, and then more could be introduced as part of a rolling content plan months or even years after release. It would help make the environment feel more like a living, breathing place and fill in some of the gaps in the story. I doubt there's any chance of anything like that happening in the present, but I'd love to see see more thought put into that side of things moving forward. To conclude, I've said it before and I'll say it again now, Halo Infinite may not have lived up to expectations entirely, but there's still plenty to build on. It gets the most important thing right, its gameplay, and there are plenty of other things to like about it too. I've no idea what the future of the Halo franchise holds, nor do I wish to speculate too much, but if 343 can tweak some of the outstanding issues and learn from their mistakes, I do still think there could be hope for the next game in the series. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and Spartans. I'll be streaming Cursed Halo next weekend, so do consider subscribing and definitely do come say hello, and hopefully I'll see you all again very soon.